Throughout history, prisoners of war have faced extreme cruelty. Cruel punishments are meant to cause maximum pain and shatter their will. From ancient times to today, these methods have tested the limits of suffering. Here are 10 of the worst punishments ever inflicted on prisoners of war. Number 10. The tiger cages. Let's dive into something truly unsettling and work our way to the stuff of nightmares. At number 10, we have the infamous tiger cages from Vietnam. These cages actually weren't for tigers. They were cramped, nightmarish spaces where prisoners of war went through unimaginable suffering. Prisoners were often hung from metal hooks or beaten with clubs. The filthy conditions festered open wounds, and shackles cut deep into their skin. The stench of human waste surrounded them. This wasn't strategic. It was pure, deliberate cruelty. Number 9. Fight to the death. At number 9, we have the Aztec punishments, known for their brutal ways. The Aztecs focused on war and sacrifice. Captured by them? Your future was grim. No negotiating. Unless you considered having your heart cut out a choice. Captured during a tribute to their god Tezcatlipoca, you'd be tied to a stone slab and forced to fight for your life. But here's the catch. While you were armed with laughably weak mock weapons, your opponents, half a dozen of Aztec's finest warriors, came at you with obsidian weapons sharp enough to slice through bone. The result? Most prisoners inevitably were cut to pieces in this grim spectacle. Yet, there was one exception. A legendary warrior named Tlalhuicole, who fought barehanded and managed to end the lives of 8 of the Aztecs' elite Tiger Knights in a feat of raw strength and fury. Number 8. Head football. At number 8, we look at a particularly shocking form of punishment, head football, used by Chinese soldiers during the brutal conflict of 1937. As Japan tried to conquer China, the violence was extreme, and for Japanese prisoners of war, capture meant terrible suffering. Torture was common, but one of the most chilling examples comes from photographer Tom Simon. He reported that Chinese soldiers would gather to watch the execution of a Japanese soldier and then play soccer with a severed head. This horrific act showed a complete lack of respect for human life, highlighting that brutality in war wasn't limited to just one side. Number 7. Ling Chi. At number 7, we step into the chilling world of Ling Chi, also known as death by 1,000 cuts, a torturous method of execution practiced in China for nearly a millennium. This wasn't your typical swift execution. Instead, the condemned was tied to a post, helpless, as executioners methodically sliced away at their body, skin, muscles, and eventually limbs, piece by piece. Each methodical blow was designed to prolong the agony, making the victim's suffering as drawn out as possible. Some say it was as much psychological torment as it was physical. The gruesome process would end only after an unbearable stretch of time, often with a final slice to the heart or decapitation to bring about the prisoner's end. Ling Chi was used as far back as the 10th century, originally reserved for the most heinous criminals and prisoners of war. Over the years, it evolved into a symbol of shame and horror, a reminder of just how cruel humanity could be. This barbaric practice lasted for almost 1,000 years, finally being outlawed in 1905, though by that point, its blood-soaked legacy was already etched into history. It's hard to imagine the terror that gripped the minds of those sentenced to such a slow, agonizing demise. Number 6. Bamboo torture. At number 6, we have one of the most terrifying and strange punishments ever, bamboo torture. After World War II, stories about this gruesome practice spread from survivors and soldiers who found their comrades' disfigured bodies. The stories say that Japanese soldiers used this awful method on Allied prisoners of war. The victim was tied above a young bamboo shoot, a plant that grows very quickly over the span of a few days. The sharp bamboo would slowly pierce through the body, going inch by inch, until it fully impaled the prisoner. The relentless, unstoppable force of nature became a weapon of unimaginable cruelty, leaving the victim helpless as the bamboo slowly tore through their flesh. This terrifying method wasn't just whispered in passing. It's mentioned in memoirs like Hakka Soul by Ping Chen, where locals recounted the horrors believed to be inflicted by Japanese forces. Whether myth or grim reality, the idea of bamboo torture has cemented itself in history as a brutal reminder of the lengths to which cruelty can extend. The idea was to strike fear into the ordinary soldier. Number 5. Brainwashing Techniques. The idea of brainwashing as a wartime torture method became well known during the Korean War. American POWs were put under extreme physical and mental stress and forced into making false confessions. The term brainwashing, first used by journalist Edward Hunter, described how communists, especially the Chinese under Mao Zedong, used harsh methods to control people. These methods included forcing people to stand for long periods, depriving them of food and sleep, isolating them, and exposing them to propaganda. American soldiers who went through these tactics confessed to things like germ warfare, which shocked the U.S. public. This fear led to the creation of training programs like survival, evasion, resistance, and escape to help soldiers resist such torture. In the 1950s, this fear also influenced the CIA's secret MK-Ultra project, where they used drugs and psychological tricks to test mind control, often without the subject's knowledge. While modern science dismisses the idea of complete brainwashing, the techniques still impact discussions on radicalization and mental manipulation in conflicts today. Number 4. Human Experimentation. At number 4, we look at the horrifying reality of human experiments in war. Instead of being carried out by simple thugs, these experiments were conducted by people who claimed to be advancing science. During World War II, Japan's Unit 731 and Nazi doctors performed some of the worst experiments. Unit 731 infected prisoners with deadly diseases, did live dissections, and tested biological weapons, ending the lives of about 10,000 people and releasing an additional 300,000 to pass among Chinese civilians. In Nazi camps, prisoners faced brutal experiments like freezing, forced infections, and injuries similar to battlefield wounds, leading to slow and painful deaths. Although these horrors were most extreme during the war, human experimentation has been done for centuries, raising troubling questions about whether knowledge gained from such suffering should be used. Number 3. The ropes. At number 3, we encounter the deceptively simple but brutally effective torture method known as the ropes. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong perfected this form of torment on captured American servicemen, and it quickly became a hallmark of their ruthless methods. Described in Human Adaptation to Extreme Stress, From the Holocaust to Vietnam, the torture typically involved binding the prisoner's elbows behind their back and tightening the ropes until the elbows touched. In some cases, the back was arched grotesquely by stretching a rope from the feet to the throat, creating unbearable tension throughout the body. The pain was relentless, and the muscles strained to the limit often suffered permanent nerve damage. This kind of torture wasn't limited to Vietnam. Turkish dissident Gülden Baran was subjected to a similar horror in her 20s. She was hung by her arms, sometimes from a wooden cross, other times with her wrists tied behind her back. The consequences were devastating. She lost strength in one arm and suffered complete paralysis in the other, a haunting reminder of the long-term damage caused by such brutal techniques. The ropes may have been simple, but their cruelty left scars that lasted a lifetime. Number 2. Water torture. At number 2, we confront one of the most chilling and long-standing methods of torture, water torture. Although it gained widespread attention in the U.S. after the CIA's post-9/11 interrogations, water torture has a history stretching back centuries. This brutal tactic dates to at least the 14th century and became a tool of the U.S. military as early as the Philippine-American War at the turn of the 20th century. Ironically, as American troops used it in conflicts, they also fell victim to it in future wars. During the Vietnam War, U.S. soldiers were subjected to water torture by the Viet Cong, but this was not the first time Americans experienced its horrors in Asia. In World War II, Japanese soldiers inflicted it on captured U.S. military personnel. One survivor, Lieutenant Chase Nielsen, testified about his ordeal, describing the sensation as being caught between life and death, gasping as water filled his lungs, a feeling of drowning without end. This cruel method wasn't isolated to Vietnam or World War II. During the Korean War, captured American pilots were subjected to the same torment. Japanese officers who used these tactics during World War II were eventually tried for their crimes, with some receiving prison sentences and others facing execution. Despite its horrific legacy, waterboarding resurfaced after 9/11 as part of the CIA's interrogation techniques. While President Obama condemned it as torture, no one was prosecuted for using it or other so-called enhanced interrogation methods, leaving a dark chapter in modern history unresolved. Number 1. Mock execution. And finally, at number 1, we have the deeply unsettling and psychologically scarring mock execution. Imagine standing blindfolded, hearing the chilling click of a gun being cocked behind your head, convinced these are your final moments, only for death never to come. That's exactly what happened to famed Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky in 1849. Sentenced to death by firing squad for his political activities, he faced what he believed would be his last moments on Earth. But in a cruel twist, it was all a ruse. Instead of being shot, he was sent to a Siberian labor camp. The experience haunted him for life, seeping into his later works, which explored the themes of crime, violence, and forgiveness. Dostoevsky's harrowing ordeal wasn't unique. Mock executions involve creating the terrifying illusion of an imminent end. Victims are led to believe their execution or the execution of a loved one is moments away. Sometimes it is as subtle as a threat. Other times it's as dramatic as pressing an unloaded gun to someone's head and pulling the trigger, or in the case of waterboarding, simulating the experience of drowning. While the U.S. Army Field Manual expressly forbids mock executions, reports from the Iraq War tell a different story. In 2005, an Iraqi man accused of theft was forced to choose which of his sons would be executed. He was led to believe his son had been shot after hearing gunfire in the distance. 2 years earlier, U.S. soldiers staged a mock execution where an Iraqi detainee was made to dig his own grave, believing he would be slain. The practice isn't limited to one country. In 2007, Iran's Revolutionary Guard captured 15 Britons, and on their second night, lined them up against a wall, blindfolded and bound, as they listened to the terrifying sound of guns cocking and firing, only to realize the guns were empty. Mock executions are powerful because they prey on the most primal fear, the fear of death. Although they leave no physical scars, the psychological impact is profound and long-lasting. Victims often relive their end through flashbacks, haunted by the moment they believed their life had ended. Despite international bans, the grim effectiveness of mock executions ensures their continued use as a tool of torture. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a comment to tell us what you think about this video in the comment section.